What are some creepiest and scariest real stories ever told by you that nobody believes? A few years ago I was walking through the woods off the beaten track a bit and I smelt this really overpowering sweet smell. Being nosy, I pulled back the undergrowth to have a look and found a dead body. The guy had clearly been there a while and wasn't looking great, all swollen and green and black with various runny bits. The local wildlife had also been dining well for a few days. I called the police, who told me to wait with the body until they arrived. Being in the middle of nowhere, it took a while for them to arrive and it got dark and I just sat there in the dark with him for a long time. It turned out he had committed suicide. For a long time afterwards I had dreams about him and he would talk to me and not nice things. Mainly about how he was angry I had disturbed his resting place and he wanted me to kill myself. Probably just my imagination, but all pretty disturbing at the time. He still turns up in my dreams from time to time and no doubt will be tonight after typing this. About 2 years ago, I was driving home from a family reunion pretty late at night, and the drive was about 2 hours. I didn't stay the night because I had to be back for work the following day. Most of the drive was on roads with dense bushes and trees on either side, the real creepy ones you see a lot in movies. Anyway, I had been driving about 45 minutes, and I was starting to get really tired. You know how sometimes you just suddenly become really tired, out of nowhere? Well yeah, that happened to me. I knew I wasn't going to last, but I didn't come across any place that I felt I could park and safely sleep. Anyway, after it became clear to me that I wasn't going to find a place to pull up, and my tiredness wasn't going away, I did something very questionable. I pulled over to the side of the road onto the grass, behind some bushes, to try and hide my car from anybody else who was going to come past. The roads weren't empty. I came across another car every few minutes or so. I made a mental note that the time was 11:22, and then fell asleep. Sometime later I was awoken by a scratching sound. I looked at the clock, 11:50. The sound stopped after a few seconds, and because I was still extremely tired, I didn't bother looking around and simply went back to sleep. I was later awoken by the same sound, and it was now 12:40. This time it really freaked me out because the sound didn't stop. The thought ran across my mind that it was just an animal inspecting the car, but why would it return almost an hour after it had left the previous time? I looked in my rear view mirror and just managed to catch a glimpse of something running away into the forest. Now, at the time, I thought it was the damn hook killer, you know, the one that scratched that couple's car and then slaughtered the guy when he got out to investigate? Fuck that, I thought to myself, so I got the hell out of there. There was a bend no more than 100 yards up the road, and as I came around it, there was a fucking car, parked off to the side of the road with the driver's side door opened. I slowed down just to look to see if anyone was in there. There wasn't. Then I looked in my rear view mirror. I didn't see anything, and all of a sudden, this guy comes sprinting around the corner. He starts screaming at me, shouting stuff like, "Hey! Hey you! Get the fuck out of your car! Now!" I noped the fuck out of there and sped off. I never saw the guy again. Moral of the story? Don't fucking sleep on the side of a deserted road. A few summers ago I went for a bike ride around midnight with a friend. We went our separate ways at the end of the evening and I had about 2 blocks to ride back by myself. Because of construction I had to ride on the sidewalk, but the streets were dead, but it wasn't a problem until right where I was about to turn left onto my street. There was this man walking by himself, maybe 40s, a little scruffy but not homeless. The sidewalk was narrow and I didn't want to freak him out, so when I got about 6 feet behind him I said, "Hey, behind you." And he turned around and gave me this super angry look. I turned down my street and he started to follow me, literally screaming about how I was a fucking cunt and he was going to kill me and all that. I live right off the corner and I didn't want him to figure that out, so I decided to do another loop around the block. That's not the scary part. The scary part is that when I looped back around and looked down the street I saw him standing on my fucking front stoop staring out at the street like the motherfucker knew I lived there. He saw me ride by again but he didn't say anything. I ended up going back to the friends, but my bike got stolen from the alleyway by the house 2 days later. This isn't very interesting, but I woke up with blood gushing down my cheek when I was younger and I didn't feel anything but my face felt wet, so I went down to my parents' room and they freaked out. Till this day we still have not clue what cut my face, but I needed 8 stitches next to my eye. We checked the sheets, pillowcases, edges of the bed, etc. Still no idea. I had awesome parents who let me sleep in the living room on weekend nights when I was very young because my sister was a light sleeper and I could stay up until dawn. But of course I always end up sleeping on the couch because Nick at night made me tried. So, one night I wake up to the prickly feeling. Like an instinct. Just bolted into a sitting position and stared out the front window. We lived in rural Georgia, so you can imagine the magnitude of trees. In perfect light cast from the moon, I see a silhouette of someone in this fucking tree. The family dog dashes to the window and is snarling into the glass. Terrified, I run into my parents' room and try to explain to my parents that there is a strange person outside. Dad grabs something defensive and darts outside with the dogs to beat the wax off the hothead. I tremble in Mama's arms until Dad comes home and says he saw no one and to go to bed. I decide to sleep in my regular bedroom. I fill in my sister in as to what happened. Dad is making regular rounds in the house with a cup of coffee. We're all still and I finally think I can sleep. Nope. I notice the man outside my window. From what I can see in the moonlight, he gives me a shush signal and runs away. Just turns around to run a straight line away. I swear I couldn't stop crying for what felt like hours. When I was a young child I had the same dream every night for years about drowning when a huge wave swept over me and I sank to the bottom. Years later I had a temp job delivering mail one summer during college. I saw this old lady sitting on a front porch waiting for me. When I got up there she looked at me and said in a foreign accent, "You drowned when Oceania sank beneath the waves." Freaked me out. My house sits farther back in the lot than most other houses. It is a strange layout as well. The sidewalk runs the length of the living room and ends at the front porch, which lets into the living room. Large windows that do not open allow great light to get into the living room, but at the cost of no privacy. The rest of my family was on vacation, and having the house to myself, I decided I would get smashed. Well, I pass out on the couch in the living room at about 9, when I realized I was too scared to walk back to my room. The couch is right underneath these big windows. I woke up suddenly, not knowing why. I had a severe case of the chills, and I could not figure out why. Then the banging started. It came from right above me. I did not move, but I opened my eyes and looked up at the window. Someone was standing there, pounding on the glass. Without moving, I looked at the cable box. It was around 3 in the morning. The banging continues. Then it stopped suddenly, but I still did not move. Suddenly it commences again, coming from 2 different directions now. Someone is banging on the window, and another person is banging on the front door. They kept doing it, and would not go away. Finally, after about 40 minutes they quit. It was the most terrifying event I can recall at the moment. It made me a nervous wreck after that. I called a friend the next day to see if he would come over and stay for the rest of the week, and his response was, "What the fuck for? So that we can both be murdered in our sleep?" I was 17 and had just gotten my license. Back in high school, my friends and I had made it a mission to find abandoned houses to throw parties in. We had a few good candidates, but the motherlode was this house I would pass on my home from work. It was an undeveloped shell of a huge home with a large property in the back. I had told one of my friends about it, and one day before we went to see a movie, I took him to the house. It was about dusk in summer, so I had my headlights on. I pulled into the front of the house and we were there for like 10 seconds tops before we pulled back to go to the main road. A minute later, this big truck pulls up behind us with its high beams on and riding our ass. My friend and I took note of it, but paid it no mind as we headed back to the main road. At the light, I turned right, but the truck cut through the gas station at the corner and blocked us off. Out of the truck comes this big hulk of a man, and my friend and I are shitting our pants. He raps on the window and I roll it down. Now, the really freaky part is that this is a busy road and now there was no one in sight. He asked us what we were doing at the house, and I quickly lied and said we were making a U-turn. He stares at us for a few seconds, smiles, and sends us on our way. To this day, the house remains unfinished and I'm convinced it's a drug operation of some sort. When I was about 10, all of my cousins and siblings were over, about 10 of us there. The parents and grandparents were out for an adult dinner. So it was just the kids sitting around watching a few movies when all of a sudden the house shook and there was a large flash coming from the backyard. It felt as if a bomb dropped. We all heard, felt, and saw it, and as a pack we ran into the hallway. The eldest cousins in the group debated on calling the police but opted to call the parents. After a few minutes we gained our courage and ventured out into the living room again, this time with weapons, just in case. After a half hour with no other issues, the parents came home and thought we were insane. There was nothing wrong with the backyard and no neighbors reported anything. It's been 10 years, and we still talk about it, trying to figure out what it was. That has been the scariest thing to happen to me by far. A week after gaining my CPR certification, I had to try and perform CPR on a woman dying of a heroin, probably other drugs too, overdose. I was at a thrift store with some friends looking for Halloween costumes, and someone came in saying that someone was passed out in the parking lot. I was in the dressing room, and it just got super quiet, so I came out and told them I was certified and I'd go take a look and that they needed to call 911. I go outside and don't see anyone on the ground. Someone comes out and shouts that the person is in the car that's parked far out by itself. I ran over and honestly freaked the fuck out. She was pretty much already dead. Completely blue in the face, slumped against her car window. She had the red druggy rings around her eyes, but those were blue too because she was so oxygen deprived. We opened the door and I'll never forget that when we turned her head to see if she still had a pulse, she had tears running down her face. We pulled her out of the car, put her on the ground, and took her pulse again because the first person to do it wasn't sure. We started CPR and the ambulance arrived about a minute after. They got her strapped up and in and continued CPR. They had another ambulance come and those EMTs got out and there was literally like 6 of them surrounding her. The cop told us they had administered some type of drug that can apparently reverse heroin overdoses if given in time, but she was pretty much dead already. They would do the necessary stuff until they could get to the hospital and call it, according to him. I also remember when we opened the door there was heroin needles and empty pill bottles all over the floor. She wasn't very old. We also think she had kids. She had some toys and a car seat, plus 2 names tattooed on her. My grandmother swore by this story till her dying day. It was during the war in London, and my dad was a baby. She was bombed out of her house and was staying with a friend. The friend had set her up in a room on the top floor. Anyway, she was taking my dad upstairs to bed when a figure materialized on the stairs telling her not to sleep in that room tonight. She knelt back downstairs and told her friend that she and my dad were sleeping in the sitting room that night. Her friend was annoyed but agreed. That night a bomb exploded near the house and the roof caved in, right on top of my dad's cot. He would have been killed. My mother told me this not too long ago, but it happened about 10 years ago now. When my cousin was 17-18 years old, she was in a car crash and died a couple of weeks later in hospital. She was really close to my dad's sister, our aunt, and used to babysit her kids, who were no older than 4 years old, all the time. Our aunt's house was under construction just before she passed away and it continued on after she passed away. One day my aunt got a phone call while she was at work from one of the construction workers complaining about a teenage girl who keeps showing up at the house and walking around and that she shows up a number of times during the weeks and it has been happening for a couple of weeks. My aunt asks for a description of the girl to see if she knows her from around the neighborhood, and sure enough the description perfectly matches my cousin who died a few weeks before. Long brown hair, red baseball cap, denim dungarees, and a white jacket. When my aunt got home, she showed them a picture of my cousin and they all agreed that it was the girl they saw walking around the site. This story really freaked me out when I heard it because our family was never one to believe in anything paranormal or have anything of the paranormal sort happen to them before. When I was in high school, I had a really good friend who lived next door to a house that was always up for sale. People would move out in the middle of the night without a word, and it hadn't had the same owner for more than 6 months straight for a couple of years. One night we were really bored and he suggested we go explore the house next door since it had sat empty for a while. We go around back and there's a dog door that he can crawl through, and he unlocks the door and lets me in. The house itself is really unremarkable. It looked like it was built in maybe the 1950s and was a craftsman-style house in an older, nicer part of town. My friend's house was similarly built. The kitchen had a really nice built-in breakfast table set against a picture window. The house's electricity was off but you could see the street light through the window. My friend and I sit down, on the floor, across from this table, and are just hanging out, talking. Why? Who knows? All of a sudden my friend screams, and in that instant, my vision goes black. But it wasn't that I just couldn't see, my body was engulfed in this sickly coldness from head to toe. I start screaming and I feel my friend's hand grabbing mine and pulling me in some direction forcefully. My vision slowly comes back and I start to warm up when I realize that we're outside under the streetlight. It was December and should have been much warmer inside of that house. Finally I look at my friend and he looks scared. I'm really confused and kind of panicked and finally asked him what happened. He says that as I was talking, a black thing. This figure that was all black and only had the vague shape of a girl crawled out from under the table and sat on top of me. Apparently I started groping around with my eyes wide open, like I couldn't see, and he was so freaked out he pulled me out of the house. We're still friends and we bring it up every now and then, but the story itself never changes and it still sends chills down my spine. To this day, I've never felt such blackness or coldness in my life. It was palpable, almost sticky. For a couple of days afterward, I couldn't shake this unsettling feeling, and I could never walk past that house again. Ugh. I'm scared to get out of bed now. When we first moved into the house I grew up in, I used to hear things calling my name from the opposite end of the house. Like, I would be in my room playing with Legos or something, and I would hear my dad call my name from his room. So I'd go to my parents' bedroom and ask them what they wanted, and they'd always tell me that they never called my name. Being a little kid, I honestly started to think that they were playing a joke on me, because this happened about once every couple of days. Well, one night it happened and I went to ask them what they wanted, like always. But right as I stepped into their room, I heard my mom's voice calling for me from the living room, which is all the way on the other side of the house. It was at that exact point that I knew no one was tricking me, because I was looking at both of my parents sitting in front of me. I kinda kept this to myself until my brother was diagnosed with partial narcolepsy. One of the symptoms of narcolepsy is apparently oral hallucinations, so I thought maybe I had it too. Went and got myself checked, completely fine. So I have no idea what was calling my name all those years, and I still hear it at night whenever I come visit and stay over. This is 100% true. I'm 23 now and this happened about 10 years ago, so I was probably 13 or 14. Anyway, I used to skate, board, all the time with my friends Tim and Brandon. One day, we got done skating and we decided to go to July 11th to get some food/drinks before we went home. Remember, I was only 13/14, so we weren't driving. We had skated on July 11th and were planning on skating or walking back home. Anyway, we buy our drinks and we left the store. We walked to the parking lot's exit and prepared to cross the highway. It's not a bust highway, since it's a small town. While we waited for the traffic light to turn red, so that we could cross, I looked behind me at the 7-Eleven gas pumps. I noticed a 40 to 50-year-old man, pumping gas into his white truck. He stared at me and before I knew it, he dropped the gas pump and jumped into his truck. He slammed on the gas and sped straight at my friends and I. He missed us, but he grazed my arm and knocked my skateboard out of my hand. My friend, Brandon, screamed, "WTF. You fucking dick," as the man peeled out and sped into the parking lot next to July 11th. I swear to God, he drove through a ditch, which was between July 11th's parking lot and the parking lot he was in, and tried to run us over again. This is where it got bad. The three of us started running at full speed, across the highway and toward the local library, which is like 2 to 3 blocks from 7-Eleven. When we were about 1/2 a block away, I looked back and saw the maniac speeding toward us, full of rage. Brandon and Tim ran up to the library doors and I ran towards the woods. It was Sunday, so I knew the library was closed and there was a trail in the woods which led to my backyard. Meanwhile, this maniac peeled into the parking lot and hopped out of his truck. I looked behind me, before escaping into the woods, and saw him grab either a shotgun or a crowbar. I was pretty far away at this point, and I was freaking out so my vision wasn't great, from the bed of his truck. I ran all the way home. When I got to my street, my neighbor, Tim's dad, told me to get in his car because we had to go to the video store, which is where Tim's mom worked. When I got there, I found Tim and Brandon. They ran to the video store after realizing that the library was closed, and 3 cops. A minute later, my mom came in, crying her eyes out because Brandon and Tim told her they didn't know if I lived or not. Everyone had thought that I was captured. Tim told me that he saw the guy running after me, into the woods, which is scary because I thought the maniac was chasing them, not me. Anyway, he was never caught, and I spent the next 5 years worrying about every white truck I saw. Not me but my sister. So growing up my sister had an imaginary friend. She said she was an older lady and she was nice and her name was EE. She talked to her and played with her all that jazz until she was probably 4 or so and then it stopped. Fast forward to when my sister was about 10. My mom isn't home. She got a call to go to the nursing home for GPA, so she bolts with Pops. My sister and I shared a room at the time and she was in there doing whatever and I was on the other end of the house. All of a sudden I hear the radio in our room click on, turn all the way up, turn all the way down, and go off. This happened like 3 times, so I go in there to be all like WTF kid, knock it off, and she is sitting in our room just white as a ghost. I go over to the radio to unplug it, no plug. No batteries, only radio in the house. I look at her and she says it was EE. I saw her, it was EE. So I call mom, freaking out, and mom is so upset. Apparently grandpa had just passed away. Okay, weird, I dropped the incident, whatever. A few days later at the funeral a relative comes up to us and gives us a pic she found. My sister goes, hey, it is EE. It was a picture of my grandparents when they got married. My grandmother died before I was even thought of, when my mom was 11. We live in the home my mom grew up in. We have no pictures of her at all as my step-grandmother got rid of them all when she moved into the house a few years after mom's death. I may have posted this before, but I don't remember. I was in high school, doing homework at the dining room table. From there, I could see the front door. Our front door at the time had a 2-foot x 5-ish pane of glass in it, with a lace curtain over it. I remember hearing a noise, like somebody was on the porch. It was probably 9 p.m. or so, it was very dark outside and the porch light wasn't on. As I'm watching the front door, I can see the screen door opening. It stands open for a minute or so, and there's nobody there, or they were dressed all in black. I'm frozen, waiting to see what happens next. The screen door just slowly closes. If someone was there, they didn't just let it go, someone was closing it carefully so that it wouldn't make noise. After that, I don't remember if I heard footsteps. Maybe they saw me watching them and decided to quietly get out of there. I always seem to get to these threads when my story will surely be buried, but here goes. When I was 13, my grandmother was dying of cancer and my mother and I stayed at her house and took care of her during her last few weeks. One night at 3 or so in the morning my mother ran into my room and told me that my grandmother, who was by this time completely bedridden, entered my mother's room, woke her up and then walked out of the room. There was no creepiness at the time, just a genuine concern for what my grandmother could possibly be doing up at 3 a.m. when she was literally days away from dying. We ran into her room, and sure enough she had passed away. Obviously, given the shock of my grandmother dying, my mother and I didn't sit around chatting about how weird the whole experience was, but months or perhaps even years later I asked her about that night and she has no memory of telling me that my grandmother was up and walking around the house. She doesn't even remember what woke her up or why she woke me up. Gives me shivers just writing it. I was on the Manassas battlefield with my father when I was younger. We were sitting on the back of his tailgate eating McDonald's on top of a hill looking at some cannons. It was foggy and misty out that day with a slight chill, November I think. All of the sudden we see a man dressed in full Civil War attire waving at us standing by the cannons, about 50 to 100 meters away. My dad had a pair of binoculars with him and we got a closer look at the man. He appeared to be in a Confederate uniform and was standing stationary, only moving his arm to wave. It was a come here wave. My dad thought there was a reenactment going on and that the man needed help. So my dad walked down to the man while I watched with the binoculars. When my dad got close to the man, he stopped walking and had a confused posture. After a couple seconds next to the man, he turns around and sprints back to me. He proceeds to throw everything in the back of the truck and we leave the battlefield in a hurry. My dad said while walking down there, the man slowly disappeared, and my dad said he got the strangest feeling in his stomach and mad chills. To this day my dad gets the chills and goosebumps telling the story. My dad saw combat in Vietnam, so he is not an easy guy to scare. From my perspective, my dad was right next to the guy and never disappeared. We don't know what we saw, but I think it was a ghost. I was walking up the hall at work and my heel went out from under me and bent my leg wonky. I didn't even fall but lowered myself down because my leg felt weird. The woman whose office I was walking past came out to find out what the loud crunchy noise she heard was. The noise was my leg breaking and she was more traumatized than I was. She had nightmares for a while and had a hard time seeing me when I returned to work. I have a fear of spiders because of a hunting trip I took with my dad and family when I was a kid. I don't enjoy shooting things, not an animal rights activist, but I think killing for game or bragging rights and not for food is wasteful and barbaric. I had brought my Game Boy and they stationed me at one of the ground blinds so I could use the radio to tell the others if I saw any deer headed their way. I got bored as shit and got tired of grinding in Pokemon, so I turned off my game and started rifling through my backpack to find another. As I did this, I heard a strange whooshing sound that sounded very close, but I couldn't find anything. I walked around outside the blind and as I came around the backside I saw that the entire outer wall was covered in a mass of fucking interlinked daddy long leg spiders. I considered running like hell, but I had no idea where the camp was. I had been driven out to the blind. My solution was to use my can of off and the lighter from my backpack to blowtorch all the spiders off. Because stupid, that's why. The plan backfired because I made the mistake of standing downwind of the spiders. The second the fire hit them they all let go and flew at me. The entire wall of them. Flaming, flying, spiders. I immediately started screaming and rolling around on the ground. I took off all of my clothes and immediately phoned my dad on the radio and told him to come get me and that we were going home. I have never sworn or cried so profusely in my life. I eventually went through therapy regarding this event, and now I just hate spiders in general and prefer not to be around them. When I was in nursing school long ago, there was a lady that did not want to be resuscitated by all means. Later she became altered and her family gained power of attorney over her. They changed her code status from DNR to full code even though that was not their mother's wishes. Since they had a power attorney over her, we had to follow the children's wishes. The lady went into VFib with no pulse or breathing. We started CPR until the code chart arrived at the bedside. The doctor went to administer a shock but the machine failed. He tried again and again. The machine would not deliver the shock. The minute she passed on, the machine worked. The hospital checks the defibrillator daily and it not working has never ever happened before. In the end, the lady ended up getting her wish of no resuscitation. Everyone was freaked out over this. I have been a nurse for 20 years and never seen this happen before. I was 16 and woke up in the middle of the night to see my clothes being rustled about in my doorway. After washing my clothes I like to hang dry them on my door frame. I notice some really gray veiny looking legs and then I see these really long pointed sticks moving through my clothes. It took me a second but my sleepy eyes adjusted to see one of the most grotesque demon looking motherfuckers I have ever seen. He was extremely skinny and had a distended stomach, his skin was gray and veiny and those long sticks were his fingers. His chin was long, his eyes had no lids on them and were unusually big. His tiny mouth was in a pucker and moved like he was eating an imaginary lollipop. His hunchback looked as though it tore out of the strange hospital gown he was wearing. He just stared at me and I tried to scream my grandmother awake who was sharing a room with me for the weekend. He wouldn't stop staring, and I stared back and tried to shake my grandmother awake. I started noticing other things about him like how large and cone-like his head was and how hairless and shriveled he looked as he stood still, surprised I could see him. My grandmother woke up, looked towards the door and he was gone. In the weeks leading to this encounter I had been experiencing strange things in my house like my bedroom door slamming and locking on its own. One night I woke up to what felt like several hands touching my feet and legs in horrible nightmares. After the experience with this strange gray man I told my parents and they had my room exorcised. If an exorcism really made those horrible things stop or gave me peace of mind from things I was manifesting myself. All I know is I don't experience those things anymore and I'll never sleep with a door open again. It's not something I tell people on a daily basis, but when I was little, I'm gonna say 7 or 8, I woke up banging on the window. At first I figured it was just the wind and tried to shrug it off to go back to sleep, but I kept hearing footsteps in my room. My room had a large enough area for you to walk in circles in front of my bed. You know, the kind of noises that are just supposed to be the house settling in. It sounded like someone was circling my room. I used to sleep with the radio on, and at this very moment it was playing a very depressing song that I can't remember the name of, but if I hear it on the radio I get the creeps still. So that really started to scare me. The room also felt as if it was getting colder. At this point I was really scared. I decided to make a run for it to my parents' room down the hall. As I passed through the area where the foots were, I got so incredibly cold that I could see my breath, and I froze for a sec only to hear the words, "I'm lost." I bolted to my parents' room, hid under their bed and cried myself to sleep. My grandfather's company, does timber mining, was setting up an office in a relatively remote part of a third world country and found a house that was dirt cheap, even for third world country standards. Obviously, there was a catch. The villagers in that area told him not to purchase it since the house was haunted and everyone who had ever lived there died violently. He decided it was just some superstitious BS and got it anyway. So the guy setting up the office will live on the top floor of the house with this family and the lower floor for the office. He moved in with his wife and 3 kids. Anyway, my grandfather suddenly got no news from him for the longest time. Since this was in a remote part of a third world country, he wasn't too worried since he just assumed they lost power or something. He finally contacted the local police to go check on the guy since he was completely unreachable. They found everyone dead. Apparently the guy killed his wife, kids, and then himself with a machete. Yes, not a gun. A fucking machete. He actually hacked himself to death. It wasn't one of those cuts on the wrists to let everyone slowly bleed to death. Everyone was hacked down, including the guy himself. The description of the scene had to be an exaggeration since I'm assuming the sight of 5 decapitated bodies, including 3 kids, were scary enough to make people see things, so I won't bother putting it here since I'm not sure what's true and there were details that people could not have witnessed. Let's just say I stopped paying attention after I heard the phrase, "magic machete." I was told the entire room was covered in blood, including the ceiling. Some people were saying the blood on the ceiling had to have gotten there because the spirits threw the bodies around. I had to explain about blood pressure and got tons of weird looks. Now, the weird part, if this isn't weird enough, was that he managed to barricade the door with the bed, with his wife and kids on it. And it's one of those gigantic old beds that's extremely hard to move. The locals say this is evidence he was possessed by spirits. I say moving to the middle of nowhere in some third world country drove the guy nuts, and crazy people can do all sorts of crazy shit and even perform crazy feats of strength. Anyway, my grandfather had to pay a few bribes to make sure nothing gets to the press, not hard, middle of nowhere, about the entire thing and get the police to classify the deaths as natural. No idea how they'll explain that. Third world countries are awesome. All employees in the know had to sign an NDA too. He then tried getting other volunteers to set up the office. Even if they haven't heard all the gory details because of my grandfather's gag order, everyone knew the previous guy died. No one volunteered. He promoted one guy, gave him a fancy title and told him he's in charge of setting up that office. The guy quit. We were living with my grandparents at the time. In my aunt's room was a 2-foot-tall Victorian-style doll converted into a lamp. The lamp would only turn on by holding the doll's cold plastic hand and raising and lowering the arm. The doll stood on a nightstand next to my aunt's bed, facing the door, greeting everyone who entered with a creepy dead-eye smile. I was alone in the house one day and wanted a blanket from my aunt's closet. Luckily for this scaredy cat, there were 2 important factors that worked in my favor. 1, it was mid-afternoon and wouldn't need the lamp's light, and 2, the closet was located immediately next to the door's entrance. So without lifting my gaze I stared at the floor, entered the room and turned 180 degrees. Now my back was towards the doll. I quickly swung open the closet door and reached down for a blanket when suddenly something about the room was different, brighter, the light was on, and the peach fuzz hairs on the back of my neck uncurled. I froze for an eternity, then felt my survival instinct kick in and wanted to run screaming in horror, but before all that I still had to look. Man, I wish I hadn't looked. As I turned to exit the room I lifted my stupid head only to confirm that the doll's hand was raised, and that it was pointed directly at me. Such traumatizing vision burned in my brain since I was 13. Much uneasy, creepy memory. It was around last year. We had a friend that went missing for almost a week. We weren't really that close, and he lives in a campus dorm, so I really didn't know till that night. My housemates saw a report from the university's FB page that there were a couple of bodies found in a spring at the far edge of the campus. Our university is located beside a mountain. We all started to worry, especially when I learned that he really had been missing. We were anxious for news to come, and when the reports of the initial ID came in, we were shocked. He was one of them. The report misspelled his last name, but we knew it was him. Panic mode. My housemates and I went out to meet with his roommates, while I called a couple of our friends that went straight to the springs. They weren't able to see him there, since when they got there, the police already took the bodies for autopsy. At that point, we couldn't do anything but wait for further news. It turns out that the two of them went swimming there the weekend before and drowned. Their bodies got really bloated from being soaked for days, and crustaceans started to eat away their skins. It really seemed at first that it was a frat initiation gone bad, because they both looked like they were covered in lashes. It's a very fucked up way to die. R.I.P. Kevin. Not all that scary, but relatively creepy. A couple of friends and I were at the annual fair held at a local park one year. Being 14-year-old girls, we thought we would be cool and separate from the large crowd at the fair by walking along a rather long walking trail that starts at the fairgrounds and travels on for a few miles. Well, it was late in the evening, and the lighting was bad. We were sitting at the mouth of a tunnel, which sat at the top of a secluded hill, when a lady with a baby approached us. She asked us if we knew a man who was standing at the bottom of the hill near a bench looking in our general direction. We told her we didn't, and her response was, "Well, he's been following you for a while. I don't know what he's up to, but you should be careful." Needless to say, we hightailed it back to the fair. When I was a kid, I had to go to sleep early at about 8 p.m. I was laying in my bed staring at the hallway lights listening to my family laugh in the kitchen. I was squinting my eyes to see how long I could make the light rays extend out. Then there appeared an old translucent lady with long curly yellow hair, and she wore a purple flower dress. She stared at me with a smile half the size of her face. I kid you not. I tried to scream but nothing came out. So I placed the blanket over my head and cried myself to sleep. The next morning I asked my sister if we had a visitor the night before. My words probably were, "Did an old white lady visit us last night?" She said no. I told her what I had seen and she said it probably was my guardian angel. Thinking of it now, I have to say, bullshit. That's some freaky way to say hello. My classmate later mentioned to his friends he saw a teenage boy with the same half the size of your face smile, standing at night in his backyard as he was going to close the garage door. His reaction was to run back into the house. A friend of mine is the type who always has wacky adventures and funny stories to tell. I swear, half the reason I keep her in my life is for the entertainment value of the crazy shit that happens to her. But this one wasn't funny. When she was about 20, she was leaving a bar one night, legal age here is 19, and as she was saying goodbyes to her friends, a fight broke out between a couple of other guys nearby. It was brief, basically one of them shouted at the other for eyeballing his woman or some BS, then just pulled a knife, stabbed him right in the gut, and bolted. This was not a sketchy neighborhood or anything. It was about as unexpected as if someone had pulled a knife in a mall food court. My friend has fortunately had some first aid training, but she's never actually had to use them before. Somehow her instincts kick in, she staunches the wound, is keeping him conscious and aware, enlists someone to call 911, all that jazz. Tended to him for nearly 20 minutes, though she lost all concept of time. When the paramedics came, she just stood up and walked off to sit down on a nearby bench, covered in a stranger's blood. She had gone into shock and didn't move from that spot for a good half hour. Fortunately, the paramedics were smart enough to realize that they should take care of her, too, so once they got the guy stable and into the ambulance, they gave her a blanket and talked to her a bit to make sure she was going to be alright and that she had friends who would make sure she got home. So it all turned out okay. But it's still the most WTF horrifying story that's ever happened to someone I know personally. I was living in this apartment in Oslo that just had this weird vibe. There were 3 of us living there, 2 girls and I. This was a building from the mid-1800s. Several weird things happened there. One of the rooms I didn't want to even go in. It was cold, even if the rest of the place was perfectly warm. Every time I was in there, thoughts of children crying or being in some kind of peril went through my head. I can't explain any better. I could not stay there for very long. My room was the old living room, and one morning I awoke to something growling like a big cat or snarling dog in my room. I was pinned down in my bed although nothing was there. I could not move. I was scared shitless. One of the girls I lived with had a cat, and even though it was only a year old, it just suddenly died. We were just hanging out, and all of a sudden we heard the cat making these horrible sounds. It was just lying in the bathroom on the floor, tongue out gasping for air and making this horrible sound. Then it died. It took like 10 minutes. I moved out of that place shortly after. I am a very big skeptic. I don't believe in ghosts etc., but that place was really unnerving. When I was 18 my grandfather was having heart problems. I would wake up every morning and go to his house to see him. I would just talk to him, help him around the house and watch TV with him. He has been really lonely since my grandmother died 3 months ago. I will never forget this moment. It was June 7th when I arrived at his house and my grandfather had the biggest smile on his face. I was so happy to see him smiling. He looks at me and says, "Guess what? I'm going to go see my wife in 2 days." At that moment, I thought my grandpa had lost it. Believe it or not, my grandfather died 2 days later in his sleep. The thought of it is scary, creepy, and disturbing. It is like he knew he was going to die in 2 days. On a side note, the last 2 days he was alive he was smiling and peaceful. I can't explain it, it felt like he knew something we don't know. I used to work as a cleaner at my school after class, so by the time I left, the roads were pretty quiet as everyone had already walked home. One day I noticed this man walking behind me, not too close but obviously following me. He was quite creepy, his face looked like it was made of plastic and he had a really subtle smile. Anyway, first time I saw him I thought nothing of it. About 2 weeks later I noticed him again, and from then on I saw him every single day when I was walking home. I didn't tell anyone because I was 16 and I knew my parents would want to start taking me to and from school, and that's not cool. Anyway, one weekend I was walking to my friend's house, which was a similar route to the one I would take to school. As I was turning up the main road that he would follow me back from school on, I happened to look over at a minibus that was parked at the bottom of the road, and I swear to God, he was sat in the driver's seat, staring through the windows at me. I called my friend and made it very obvious that I was on the phone thinking it might deter him, but when I next turned around he was about 2 meters behind me, with that same plasticky smile. I started to sort of walk/run and I could actually hear him doing the same, keeping the same pace and distance the whole time. I was still on the phone to my friend and I told her to open her front door and wait for me. When I got there I ran straight in and we locked up the door. The guy just stood outside her house for about 2 hours, smiling and staring out the window. After that I never saw him again and I've moved away since, but when I went back to visit my parents last weekend, that minibus was still there parked in the exact same spot. When I was 13, my mom used to drop me home from school and then pick my brother up. One day, I was dropped home and went on the computer like always. Minutes later, I heard the sink in our kitchen turn on and off and the microwave door open and shut. I assumed that my mom still hadn't left and didn't think anything of it. Another couple minutes go by and I hear my mom and brother come in. I greeted them saying, "Wow, that was fast. You just left." My mom was confused and said that she left a while ago. I'm still not sure what happened. I think the scariest part was not expecting that something weird was happening. I was in high school. The bus had just dropped me off and I was unlocking the front door when a grown man came onto the lawn and asked me if I had any money. I said no. He kept approaching me. I got the door unlocked and then Bear, my 100-pound solid black, territorial working German Shepherd, came barking and growling, practically frothing at the mouth. The creep took one look at Bear and noped the fuck out of there. I don't like to think what would have happened if I hadn't had Bear. Most recent disturbing event, at midnight this past Saturday, I opened the door to let my dogs outside to go potty. As I'm standing there, this enormous rat runs through the door and into my foot. I started yelling, which awoke my boyfriend. We flushed it out of the living room, but now it's behind my stove. I can hear it rustling around. The weather was too crappy to go get traps, so I'm spending yet another night with a gigantic rat in my house. When I was in high school, I had a class in what was known as the Orange Hall. Every day in that class I would annoy someone whistling the song Pop Goes the Weasel, but really slowly. 2 years later, when I had a class in the same hall, I heard it again, nearly every day. Now my sister is in high school and her friend said something about someone whistling the song. I found this strange because my sister is so much younger than me. There is no way the same annoying student was still there doing this every day. She said she asked her teacher about it and the teacher said that happens every day around the same time. It's been happening for 10 years and they've never been able to find anyone whistling in the halls. This isn't my story, but a former teacher told it to me and swears it is true. She said that when she was a child, she shared a room with her younger sister. One night, she was in her bed and her sister told her to look toward the door. She looked up and saw the silhouette of a man standing in the doorway. She had a light switch right next to her bed, so she turned it on and there was nobody in the doorway. They called for their dad and he came in asking them what was wrong. They told him what they had seen and he said it was probably just their eyes playing tricks on them. The next day, my teacher went downstairs and saw her father sitting at the kitchen table just staring. She asked him what was wrong and he said, "Was the man you saw a tall man?" She claims that each member of the family saw the silhouette a number of times over the years, and each time it was the same thing. They would turn on a light and there would be nobody there. I've been creeped out ever since she told me this story. My friend's friend went to Vegas once to blow off some steam. She then went to a club and met a guy she thought was super cute. She hung out with him the whole night and they made out a bit. He asked her to come home with him. She declined as she wasn't really one to do that, but she made plans to hang out with him later. A few days later she developed sores around her mouth, so she went to the doctor. Turns out she had contracted a flesh-eating bacteria. Not only that, but it was a strain that is only found in humans that consume other humans' flesh. The woman called the cops and they went to the guy's apartment. They found body parts in the fridge. Apparently he had been going to clubs, taking women home with him, and then eating them. About 25 years ago I was driving to a friend's house and came up behind a car moving at about 15 miles per hour on a 40 miles per hour two-way road. I move into the opposite lane to pass and suddenly the guy speeds up and rams his car into mine, forcing me to the side of the road. That's the scary part. Here's the creepy/miraculous part. This happened on a Sunday, in an industrial part of South Tucson, which is primarily Hispanic. When my car came to a stop after being forced over by a raging motorist dude, there were two guys standing there 10 feet from where I came to a stop, a pale redhead and an Asian. The motorist was exiting his car to come over and do God knows what to me or my car, with an angry look on his face. He took a look at the two guys and got back in his car. I didn't stick around long, but I often think about those two guys just standing there doing nothing but looking out of place in an otherwise ghost town, empty part of town, and what might have transpired had they not been there. I'm not a religious person, but if there is an equivalent force to angels in this world, I believe that was my brush with a couple of them. This is a bit disturbing and creepy more than scary. During my first semester of college, my grandmother was diagnosed with terminal cancer. I moved in with her and my grandfather to help take care of her. She was given 2 months to live but made it to 9 before passing. Shortly after her death, I would be alone in the house and would see her walking through the hallways, or would sense her sitting on a bed behind me in the computer room. It never freaked me but did catch me off guard. Another time, in the same house, a girl I was dating stopped by and I went out into the garage to get something and she was waiting for me in the laundry room that was next to the garage. I came in and we hugged for a moment when we both heard a dog running through the house. We could hear his feet/nails hitting the tile floor and the sounds got closer and closer until we saw it round the corner and run directly between our legs and through the closed door and into the garage. We both just looked at each other in disbelief and then left. The dog was one that my grandparents owned many years before and that had passed away when I was 2. I only remember it from pictures. When I lived with my parents, I had come home after having spent the Saturday at a friend's. To my surprise, the house was quiet. My parents were supposed to be there but no one responded when I said hello. I walk around and check the living room, the bedrooms, then decide to check the kitchen for a note or something, but instead I find blood everywhere. It was clear that something very bad had happened and I got this ill feeling. There was blood all over the sink, the countertop, the floors, just everywhere, so I went to grab the phone but it too was covered in blood. As I stood there frozen in fear staring at the blood-spattered wall by the phone, it dawned on me that whoever did this could still be in the house. My eyes then follow the blood down the wall to the floor where I see it trail toward the doors to the garage and the basement. I immediately dart out the front door screaming for help and see a cop car pull into the driveway following my mom's car. My mom jumps out of the car covered in blood and yells, "We have to find Dad's finger." I soon somewhat find relief in discovering my parents are alive and well and that my father had just lost his finger while using the chipper/shredder in the backyard. Along with the police, my mom and I look through the wood chip pile for Dad's finger, but to no avail, so to this day he has one less digit. The day after the accident, I was told to put the chipper/shredder away and move the pile, so I did and ended up finding Dad's finger. It was white and fleshy, almost fake looking, but it was real. I didn't want to touch it, so I picked it up with 2 sticks and brought it to my father, who cried at its belated discovery. We buried it in the backyard later that day next to our old dog. There was a local kid a few years back that would have dreams about a WW2 pilot that was shot down somewhere in the Pacific. In the dreams he was the actual guy. Really weird stuff. He knew everything about the guy. The ship's name, the pilot's call sign, his best friends, and his sister's names. He could even recall conversations that the dead pilot had with his buddies. I think 60 Minutes or something like that had a special on him and checked all the information the kid had about the pilot, and it matched up perfectly. The kid had never read/watched anything about WW2 before. The kid's dad wrote a book about all this stuff that was really interesting and creepy. Back in late 2002, early 2003, I lived on an isolated road heading out to the middle of nowhere. A narrow road with no side streets, so houses after the first few miles, and no streetlights. Accidents were common since people loved to race down this road. One night I was home alone with the ex when we heard another car crashing. Only this one sounded weird, like lots of cars wrecking. So we grab our shoes and run down to the road, and there is literally debris everywhere. A pickup truck had taken the turn too hard and ejected all 3 passengers. The multiple crashes we heard was the truck crashing to the ground after each rotation. When we got to the road, the truck was all smashed up, but somehow its engine was revving and there was smoke everywhere as if it were on fire. All car parts and people were laying on the road. It was dark, so it was really hard to see, but I could see the outlines of a man just sitting in the middle of the road making this horrible noise. His friend was lying there dead, so I don't know if he was screaming in pain or shock or what, but it's a sound you never forget. By that time cops had shown up and used their spotlights on the scene, which made it worse. My mind won't recall a single image from that moment, as weird as that sounds. I can remember the guy on the road, and though I can't see his friend, I know he's next to him, and I know when all the spotlights go on the road is a mess, but that's all I remember seeing. What I know happened is when the guys were ejected, their bodies were torn apart. So much so that police were walking around with body bags after the victims had long since been driven off. I know the scene was so bloody that the road and the pull-off in front of our driveway was stained with blood for days. And the neighbor told me I calmly stepped over remains I noticed next to me when the lights went on. But I don't recall any of it. The only other thing I remember from that night is the life flight helicopter circling overhead and all the trees moving because it was so low. That alone is an eerie experience. Out of 3 men, 2 died on the screen. 1 lived and fled the country. They were migrant workers, probably my worst memory. My uncle passed away from brain cancer, but my mom and I were kinda taking care of him through it. I was not yet a teenager, but saw the sadness in my mom when she was dealing with his dementia. He was really fucking rude to her and made me really uncomfortable. For instance, he would call her stupid for not stacking his papers right, flip out, then accuse her of stealing all his cups, so there were like 50-50 real insults and some just out of nowhere. They always had a good relationship, so it was also puzzling for me observing them together in good spirits a decade before. About a year after he died, we got home to find a few blinking messages on our tape answering machine, the mini tape ones. We play it and it's him, my uncle. First message was one we had heard before, but we think not too much of it. The second one was one we hadn't. It was him apologizing to my mom. I recall I shouldn't have said that earlier, so it had to have been after one of those times we left his house. Damn, it was so chilling. I tried to find some date correlation on why it would happen a year later rationally or supernaturally, but we simply don't know how. My mom and I were on a walk around the neighborhood when I was in high school. It was summer and there were a ton of frogs making noise trying to mate. However, in front of one house, hear what sounds like a human screaming for help. It kept going like a video playing the same 3-second clip of a woman screaming over and over. We shrugged it off initially as he'd left the TV on, but we felt really weird about it for the rest of the walk. When we came back by the house, we could still hear the noise. Some of our other neighbors had the house key to this place. The owner was an old widower and they went by from time to time to do housework stuff he had difficulty with. We went over there, told them what we heard and that it seemed kind of weird but was nothing. They agreed to go check on him since they hadn't heard from him in a few days anyway. The poor old man died 2 weeks prior. The neighbor didn't hear any sounds besides the damn frogs. Still gives me the creeps to this day. One day, I found out my uncle was in the hospital because his heart problems caught up to him. So my family and I called the hospital, and we talked to him. He always could make any situation a bright situation. He had the best sense of humor. He was making jokes and I was trying to laugh as I was crying, and trying to put words out through the tears. We had to hang up before I could say bye or I love you or anything. The next day we got a call saying how he died, and that he wanted us to know first. The next morning, I just woke right up, my eyes flew open. I don't know why, I just did. Then I saw an orb banging on the walls and flying around. I had a feeling it was him, so I asked Are you my uncle? Dennis. It responds by floating over the picture I have of him on my wall. Then I hear a whisper in my ear, in his voice, because it fucking wanted to, it has his rights. That was the ending to our favorite joke that could make me smile anytime. It's not so creepy, but it felt good knowing that he was okay. Miss you, Dennis. When I was a kid I was trying to get to sleep at my grandma's house, tossing and turning. I rolled over one time and there was a kid standing next to my bed, who seemed to kinda be glowing. He was wearing really old clothes and holding a big birthday present and a party hat. Rolled over, shut my eyes tight, and forced myself to sleep. Few years later I'm laying in bed, first night sleeping in our new house, looking up and seeing a bright-ass light in the corner of my room. Soon as I look it kinda swoops down over me and out my door, loud buzzing as it goes that left my ears ringing for a while after. Aside from those just random weird things like, when you have a TV on behind you and someone walks by and blocks the sound? That, but when nobody else is in my room. Almost forgot. Years after I saw the boy in that room my uncle had moved into that room, something like 10 years later or better IRC. Wakes up to the feeling of someone sitting down on the end of his bed, looks, nothing there. A few minutes later he feels whatever it was get off the bed. My fiancé traveled all around the states for work and we were living in Texas. We got the call for another job in PA, so before going out there we decided to visit our families in CA. Now for some reason I had a horrible feeling and we got in a fight about going home. Our families' homes were about 6 hours apart in CA, so we stopped at his parents' house for a night and I took off to my parents' house with our son the next morning. I bawled my eyes out the morning I left. I couldn't understand why I was so upset because I'm not a super emotional person. He held me and told me, "It's not like I'm going away. I'll see you in less than a week." I drive home and I'm there for 2 days or so. I talked to him on the phone late one evening and he sounds really tired. I get off the phone and quickly fall asleep. I find myself having an overwhelming feeling of cold. Like I'm all alone and sorrow and blackness is enveloping me. It was the scariest feeling I've ever experienced. The next day I try in vain to reach my fiancé by phone. I got the most heartbreaking phone call ever at about 6 p.m. He was gone. Passed away in his sleep from heart disease related problems. I felt him leave me. I know this now. It was creepy and scary and I can never shake the feeling. I miss him every day. When I was 13 I lived in a small town in rural Zimbabwe. We had a large, single-story house with a massive garden that surrounded the property. On one side of the house, the garden narrowed between our house and the fence of the neighbor's house. At the end of this narrow section was an empty, decrepit cement-lined pond that I had recently cleared of rubble and plant life with the plan of eventually filling it again. One afternoon, my friend Dan and I were messing around in the garden, and for some reason I found myself running down the narrowed section of the garden straight towards the pond. Suddenly, and for some reason that I can't really articulate, dread and fear washed over my body like 1,000 needles raining from the sky. I stopped dead in my tracks about 2 meters from the pond, and found myself breathlessly staring at it, motionless. From the crack on one side of the pond, a long snake, perhaps a meter long, emerged 3 or 4 seconds later. It was a Mozambique spitting cobra, a large, aggressive and extremely venomous snake that wouldn't hesitate to bite or spit at threats, like a 13-year-old boy running past its new home in the wall of the pond, for instance. I slowly backed away and the pond was refilled with sand the next day. To this day I don't know what it was that stopped me dead in my tracks, but if I continued perhaps I wouldn't be here today. It was 2002 when I was hitchhiking around the US. I was on my way to a rainbow gathering in the Mark Twain National Forest just outside of Ironton, Missouri. It was about 11 p.m. when we made it to the state road that led into the forest. It was too dark to see the discrete stacked stone currents that led us to the seed camp location, so we decided to pull it over on the side of the road and wait till morning. All night, we heard what sounded like children playing. Lots of kids. Like an entire playground's worth. Except we were miles from the nearest public road, out in the middle of BLM land, and the noises continued on throughout the entire night. Next morning we found the seed camp location and settled in. At the height of the gathering there were maybe 150 people there, but in the seed camp stage there were maybe a dozen or so of us who got there early to set up the site. A few of us went wandering around in the hills looking for firewood and perhaps a fresh spring to get water from. We came across an old foundation for a house out in the middle of the woods. The house that stood on it must have been gone for quite some time because there were decent-sized trees growing where it once stood. There were a few pieces of rotted-out boards scattered about, and some rusted nails and other metal bits that must have served some integral function for the home. We figured there might be some cool old junk lying around, so we looked closer. We found a kid's shoe, half rotted into the forest floor. Then we found another. And another. And another. And then we found half-decayed garbage bags full of them. Hundreds of kids' shoes, of all styles, from old-timey dress shoes to those jelly shoes from the 80s. Some looked relatively new, some looked like they'd been out there for decades. Scattered within a 25-foot radius of this old foundation. Oddly enough, there wasn't any other stuff out there. No old refrigerator, or maybe some junk appliance or tools or whatnot. Just kids' shoes. This happened my senior year of college, Christmas break 2006. I worked for a professor that asked me to house/dog sit for him while he was out of town to see the bowl game that we were in. He was gone for 3 days and had a huge piece of land in the middle of nowhere. I invited my GF at the time. He had horses and fishing and a gator to ride around on, etc., so the first 2 nights went down with no incident, but the last night, his little foofy dog is having a fit. She keeps barking at the back door. At first we blow it off, but decide to lock the dog inside in case of a coyote or something. After a while we start to get a little creeped out. I keep saying it's probably an animal and we'll be fine. My GF, not too bright, wants to go investigate to see what's outside, so I lock the door behind her. Just kidding. She goes outside and says she saw something small and gray, probably a coyote, and it ran off. So, just an animal, no worries. But by this time, we're pretty spooked. The dog now starts barking at the window on the other side of the house. We're still trying to ignore it, but a little worried. We decide to get into bed, awkward silence, then I hear it. It sounds like a young girl singing a soft, eerie lullaby. I don't say anything, hoping that my mind is playing tricks on me. My GF says, "Let's get the fuck out of here." I say, "Why?" She says, "You didn't hear that little girl singing?" Okay, let's get the fuck out, and we got the fuck out. I even called someone to talk to me while we walked out to my car. Next morning, I went to clean up the house and such. When I was about 10 or 11 I was living with my grandmother. My bed was in the corner of my room with the long side against the wall and right up against the window. Crappy paint drawing to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. Well, I slept with my head towards the wall, and I was usually turned towards the wall with the window. This window was a weird size and didn't have any blinds, just curtains. The curtains hung in front of the window, so there was a small gap towards the side of the window where you could see into or out of my room if you were standing at the right angle. I was laying in bed trying to fall asleep when I turned my eyes towards the window and saw something standing there, looking right at me. It was just a silhouette, but something about the way it was shaped just felt wrong. The head was large, the body was a little too skinny, and the way it was bent over just didn't feel right at all. I tried to act like I was asleep and rolled ever so slightly to try to get a better look, but it stood back up and ran away. It was tall too, at least 6 foot. I hopped out of bed and ran into the living room where my grandmother was watching the 10 o'clock news. I told her that I saw someone looking into my window and she grabbed a flashlight and ran outside. I followed her, and we looked around trying to figure out what it was. We couldn't see anything at all, and after that night we set the curtains further back so they completely blocked the window. Whatever the hell it was, we never figured it out. When I was younger, about 10 or 11, I lived in a house in California with a decent-sized property, about an acre. Where my room sat on the side of the house, we had a side yard where we had our motorhome under a cover. Being as young as I was, my bedtime was about 8 o'clock or so, and my dad was known to do things outside fairly late in the night. He had a detached garage in the back he would work on projects in. Well, one particular night, I had just gone to bed and was laying awake when I saw a strange yellow light outside my window. I looked out expecting to see my dad and the shadow of the motorhome, but I didn't, just yellow light. Now this light filled my entire room. I could see every inch and corner of my room, nothing like a normal flashlight, and I knew for a fact that my dad didn't have a flashlight that bright or color. As I'm staring at this light for a few minutes, almost like I was stuck in a trance, I see a figure in the light. This figure was human looking, but not quite. Its head was much too large for a normal human, and it was extremely skinny. I was absolutely stunned by this until it lifted a skinny arm up, held an open hand up, waved, and vanished along with the light. I sat there blinking in the darkness for a second, trying to figure out what I had just seen. I slowly got out of bed, walked out to the living room to find my dad sitting in his recliner, drinking a beer and watching TV. I stood there for a second and he looked over at me and asked me what was up. I asked him, "Dad, were you just out by the motorhome?" He said no and asked me why. I didn't know what to say, I didn't know what to think, I just kind of shook my head and went back to bed. I went out the next day and could not find any sign of anything I had seen the previous night. To this day I have no idea what I saw or what to think of it. Had a friend back in the day. Her mom and her younger sister lived in a house. The family was well off, and owned a very large chunk of land. The mother and father were divorced, but the father lived in a house a few hundred acres away on the same plot of land. For about a year, the family had been noticing things out of place in their house, sometimes the TV being left on, drawers left open, food left out. They two sisters also talked about sometimes being tucked in at night, but they always thought it was their mom. Later finding out it was not. One day the mom and the youngest sister were pulling in their garage, the door into the house and the garage was open and there was a man standing in the door. He had snot pouring out of his nose and was breathing heavily. He went to go behind the car so the women could not back up, but like a smart woman the mom was having none of it, and she slowly continually backed up. The man started banging on the windows, but they got out of there, and called the cops. 2 police showed up, and entered the house. The man was pouring gasoline around the house, and shots were fired. The man and one of the police officers were shot, both lived. He was arrested. He had been living in their attic/crawl space. He got out of prison after, I think, 7 years. The girls were pretty freaked out when he was released. Weird side note, the cop that was shot, okay, but if the bullet had been something like an inch to one side, it would have hit an artery. He apparently said that he believed an angle pushed him to make that difference of where the bullet hit. One more, because I'll always remember this guy. I got lost on the bad side of town many years ago, and stopped at a Circle K to ask for directions. One of the guys standing outside the store came up to my window and said, "Hey, I'm going that way, I can show you how to get there," and me being the idiot 18-year-old female that I was said sure. About 3 miles into the journey, the guy turns to me and says, "By now I could have raped and killed you." I'm only telling you this because it happened to my sister 2 years ago. You seem like a really nice girl and I would really hate to hear that something bad happened to you. Sorry to scare you, but if it saves your life then I've done my job. You can let me out here. A similar thing happened my first day on a door-to-door sales job. A guy told me to come into his house so he could get his checkbook, and once again an idiot 18-year-old me went in. He went through a similar spiel. Don't ever go into someone's house that you don't know. It's really quite amazing that I made it to my age, now that I think of it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment down below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel by clicking here, and hit the bell icon to get notified whenever I post a new video. Check out these videos for more content you might enjoy. See you in the next video.
I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't that great. I don't wanna go to work, cause my boss is a jerk, and I'm not even that paid. I need a change in my life, cause I don't feel alive, and there's nothing that